Hey, welcome everybody to the Evolution versus Creationism after show that we had on the NonSequitur show with Dr. Garte and RM Huffman. They were talking about a lot of different topics, and it got very broad, I think. And so I kind of don't, I know we don't have time to address some of the myopic details that they were getting into, although as much as I'd like to, especially with the people we have in here. But maybe we can talk about a few things that we didn't get to discuss on the Non-Sequitur show. And I don't have a lot of time, only for the fact that I will be on the Goddess Iwin's channel tonight at 8 p.m. my time Pacific, and that's only in about 2.5 hours. So we're not going to have a very long after show, but if you guys have some questions that were not answered in the Non-Sequitur show, let me know, and maybe we can try to get it in now. But anyways, I got Dave and Jackson and Jade and Cy and Wayne. So let me just throw this out there. Cy, was there anything that you specifically wanted to address that you weren't able to? Because we had talked off air about macroevolution, and my comment was that I think R.M. Huffman's definition of macroevolution was very stipulative. I think it was idiosyncratic in some ways, personal to him, because it didn't make much sense to me. And I've never seen macroevolution defined any way that a creationist has defined it in the literature. So my question when I asked about macroevolution, what it means in biology, if you want to redefine something, then it doesn't just get rid of the fact that macroevolution exists in biology. Would you agree? You're muted, by the way.
I'm muted. Okay, here we go. Yeah, I mean, I think actually these terms, macroevolution, go back a ways, as he said. That's true, but the definitions of them have changed periodically, and among everybody, among creationists, among evolutionary biologists. You know, the basic point that I was trying to make is that when you're talking about evolution as a whole, micro and macroevolution have no meaning, because the general overall processes of variation followed by natural selection are the same.
Mm-hmm.
However, it can be useful on occasion to borrow from the creationists and say that macroevolution is changes in body plan, large scale, major saltations in the evolutionary record. You could use that, and then you come up with ways that could happen that might be different from the more standard, random mutations in structural genes, and that's what's being done now by a number of pioneers in the field. So it gets very murky, and I think those terms are ill-defined, and it's interesting because last night I was on a discussion group that included P.Z. Myers, and he was saying similar things about definitions of evolution itself and other things like that. It's, that's the problem with biology. We're not as crisp in our definitions as physicists are.
And I agree that the terms have changed, but by any definition in biology that I'm aware of, these things still exist. Whether you want to define macroevolution on a somewhat like common ancestry, or if you wanted to define it as the same evolutionary mechanisms within multiple species, those things happen. But I think the problem that we run into is when a creationist wants to redefine it in a way that makes no sense to me. When he says something along the lines of, we would expect to see wheatgrass become something other than wheatgrass, that's not macroevolution in any biological sense of the term, correct?
Yeah, I mean, but this is the argument that they have. They love to point to the Linsky experiment and Lenski experiment, sorry, and say that with all this time and all these mutations, E. coli are still E. coli, and it just misses the entire point.
Because the Linsky experiment, it made a new, well, it had an existing biological metabolic pathway to digest, was it citric plus, and then anaerobically. So it basically just created a new pathway to an old existing pathway, which what you would expect for evolution, right?
Well, exactly. I mean, and you could define. I mean, you can't define species of bacteria the way we define species of other multicellular animals, because it's not a question of interbreeding or in fact, the definition of species in bacteria is very loose and fluid and not very clear. So that I'm not sure that the proper interpretation of the Lenski experiment is that E. coli is still E. coli. I mean, they're probably E. coli with some other,
Well, it'd be something. Well, yeah, because you have strains, and bacteria is a little bit different like that, as you.
Yeah. So that's not a good example, but it's used all the time. And I think he was also saying, I think he was using the argument that, we are assuming that evolution occurs and therefore all the data fits. But that's not how science works. You can assume something and then find out you're wrong. That's called testing a hypothesis. And, there is nothing that has ever disproven the general idea of evolution. There have been holes and problems and questions, and that's being worked on and answers are being found. So I don't know if I was able to make that point well enough, but that in a way he was right that everything is based on presuppositions, and he admitted that his presupposition is that Genesis is, quote, literally true, which frankly, by the way, is not correct either. Literally, they don't really take a literalist view of Genesis either, but that's a they did that to be a flat earther.
Let me ask one more question before I turn over to Jackson.
Yeah.
People want to get some questions in.
Sure.
Because you did say one thing that was surprising. You had said that you think that evolution stopped, and I don't know what you mean by that because
okay.
because I know you're not meaning it biologically, because obviously in every population, evolution. Yeah, it doesn't stop. You mean you also be clones.
Right. But we consider modern humans to have arisen, Homo sapiens to have risen about 200,000 years ago. Modern humans behaviorally around 70 to 50,000 years ago. The dates are fluid. That's a blink of a second in evolutionary time. You would never expect any population of any species to undergo major evolution in 50,000 years. So yeah, of course we're not done with evolution. What I meant to say by that is that we've made huge changes in the way we live that would be equivalent to a lot of genetic evolution in any other species, but it's not due to that. It's due to our brains. Richard Dawkins said humans are the only species that have escaped the slavery of our genes, and that's
right.
True.
Because we have a well-developed consciousness and intelligence.
Because of our brains, exactly. So all the evolution that's gone on is cultural.
But wasn't that due to evolution? The fact that, wasn't that due to evolution? The fact that the brain over a period of time had more power going to it, literally more watts, and the energy consumption was transferred from our physical things like muscle mass to give to the brain. So the brain has a higher amount of energy that it's using, and therefore it will develop more intelligence and conscious. That's
part of it.
Yeah, but that's part of it. Jackson, since this is your area as well, did you watch the debate, and what did you think of it, or the discussion? I don't even want to call it a debate. You guys seem to agree on most things.
No, not really.
Well, during the
discussion, we were stretching to agree.
You're so gracious. You try to find commonality, even though I know that you guys are worlds apart in reality.
Worlds apart. Yep.
Yeah. Jackson, you there?
Yeah, I have not. Well, hello. I have not watched it. I'm very intrigued to take a look at it, though, to see what sort of citations he's building his argument from. Did he say anything that was outlandish even by creationist standards?
Oh, that's a good question. No, because I think the creationists tend to use the same tropes. I mean, like you said, when I explained to him that macroevolution has been observed in wheatgrass, and I'm going to turn that over to Jade in a second because she did some research on this, that he immediately threw out the creationist thing. Well, it's still wheatgrass, and of course, we all know that it's supposed to be still wheatgrass. It's not going to ever be not wheatgrass. And so the creationist sits there and says, well, look, that's creationism. And we're like, no, that's evolution. And then they go, well, look, and we just look at the same data from two different things. No, because they expect, if evolution's true, that wheatgrass would no longer be wheatgrass. That's the mistake that's being made, correct?
Yeah. It's like when they say, monkeys turned into people. I mean, that's not what happened. So
two monkeys made it and poof. Person.
I don't know. Wheatgrass is not going to turn into asparagus. That's obvious. Yeah, I think he knows that. I mean, he's at a much more sophisticated level. I think he was using those tropes, but he didn't really believe them.
They don't seem to they never seem to understand cladistics. Just like on a fundamental level, they don't have.
Yeah.
Or the parental clades, which is why they ask things like the why doesn't wheatgrass turn into an apple tree or something like that. That's why they ask these things.
Yeah. I'm curious because I heard you say that biological evolution is more or less stopped and everything's been social for the last while. But it doesn't seem that people make that sort of argument for other species that have overcome like limitations of like the individual for the benefit of a colony, like ants, right? They've developed ways over a long period of time to work as a sort of a hive mind and whatnot, right? And somewhat use tools and things like this. So, I mean, if we get to the point, say, where because of the biological evolution of the brain, we develop technologies that extend life. So who knows, we live 150, 200 years, life expectancy goes up. That's a biological shift as a result of technology.
No, exactly. It's already gone up. Our lifespan is double what it used.
Just in that alone, I would say that's still evolution. And it's still as a result of the biological advancement of the brain over a great deal of time. So, I don't know how you could say it's really stopped in everything but socially.
Because
we've seen up in the last few hundred years.
The reason I say that is because when I talk about evolution as we generally think of it in a biological sense, I'm talking about a very specific and narrow kind of evolution. I don't just mean change. I mean, the change in allele frequencies in populations over time, which lead to phenotypic changes that are then selected for and get fixed in the population. So that's a very biological and very specific definition of evolution, which doesn't, cultural evolution is similar, but not exactly the same. It operates by different mechanisms, as you said, mostly mental mechanisms, brain-related mechanisms, but it's different in nature from the genetic.
Yeah, there's definitely social evolution, and it's fine to talk about it. I think in terms of
but it's a different subject.
But it's a different thing altogether. And in fact, we were just talking about this the other day. Maybe you can shed some light on it because it's kind of interesting, and then we'll go back to the wheatgrass thing. But does evolution actually does it actually select for beliefs that are true, vice beliefs for survival?
No, there's no natural selection mechanism for truth. It's for survival.
It's for survival, but do members of a species, if they have a true belief, and they have that as a survival mechanism, is that more likely to be selected for?
Well,
it's actually a very big thing in social evolution right now.
Yeah.
Is any benefit to have a true belief or a false belief as far as being selected for? But,
so again, that's of course limited. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
I was just saying, I think you'd have to look at what is the utility of having that belief versus whether or not it's true or false. I think maybe things that are true more often have a benefit in some regards, but if you look at like type 1, type 2 errors, the person who's going to go run away from the rustling bush to survive, absent something in it's got a better survival rate than somebody who assumes it's the wind. So,
so you're familiar with the argument, David, obviously, because that's the tiger argument.
Yeah. So I think it's a combination. It depends on what area of truth you're looking at.
Yeah, obviously. I think there's obviously going to be selected for if you run away from the bush, you think there's a tiger in there, and you run away. It's not a true belief, but it's still being selected for. Right? If there's a tiger in there, but that kind of goes to what the value of a true belief over a not true belief, or value even of belief over knowledge. We give this credence, called credit value, to knowledge being superior over belief. But if the belief is just happens to be true, right? Coincidentally, it's really not any epistemically higher value externally than having knowledge. But that goes to what's called value theory, and I think it's called value theory. Is that what it's called, epistemic value theory? We need Ozzy for that. But It's a fascinating argument. I mean, so I was just wondering if he's heard of that argument where true beliefs are actually selected for, biologically speaking, through natural selection because of that. But anyways, okay, so we lost everybody on that. So Jay, do you want to go quick talk about your research on the wheatgrass real quick?
Oh, okay. Yeah, the wheatgrass thing is actually fairly simple. Wheatgrass is due to two hybridization events. The first one, well, wheatgrass started off as diploid. In other words, it had two sets of chromosomes. Wheatgrass crossed the ancient wheatgrass, which was a lot like einkorn. Einkorn is a very ancient wheat that we still grow. So an einkorn-like wheatgrass crossed with an Agalops species of grass. Completely different genus. Agalops grasses are sometimes known as goat grasses in the common parlance. So what happened was a hybridization event. So the child of that became a tetrapod species. In other words, it had 4 sets of chromosomes. It had the 2 sets of chromosomes from the wheatgrass and the 2 sets of chromosomes from the goat grass. So it's now tetraploid with 4 chromosomes, and it was much like a wheat that is currently grown called emmer. Now, einkorn and emmer are cultivated wheats, so they're slight improvements over our common wheats. And you can buy the flowers of einkorn and emmer, and they are sometimes useful for people who have some gluten sensitivity because they have a lower gluten rate. So then the tetraploid, the emmer type wheatgrass, crossed with a completely different Agalops species. And again, this can be tracked through the genes. And the resultant are the modern wheatgrasses, which are hexaploid. So they have the 4 chromosomes, the 2 sets of chromosomes from the one parent, the wheatgrass parent, and the 2 chromosomes, the chromosomes from the Agalops, the second Agalops grass. So they are now hexaploid, meaning they have the 6 sets of chromosomes. And that's our modern bread wheats. And one of the results of these repeated crosses, and the reason that these are called bread wheats, is an increase in gluten, which means they can rise a lot better. And this was a real advantage. And it's why modern wheatgrass and wheatgrass types are cultivated more often than the others. The only reason the others are cultivated is because certain peoples in certain areas of the world clung to their what are called landrace varieties. Landrace varieties are varieties that are kind of unique to a particular culture or a particular region, and they are usually more ancient varieties. Like there are a number of landrace varieties of corn. So einkorn and emmer managed to survive because of their usefulness in certain certain areas, certain cultures. So that's it. So it's 2 sets of hybridization have resulted in modern wheatgrass, which is a hexaploid variety. But it's still a wheat. But it's considered a wheat rather than a goat grass because its characteristics are more like that of wheat, even though a large percentage of its genes came from a different genus altogether.
And I think it's a perfect time to go into that discussion they just had, what you were talking about, because all of that, the diploid to the polyploidy and quadploidy and all these different things that they do add information to the genome. Because I wanted to ask Dr. Huffman what he means by de novo, because the way I learned de novo would be like a gene that's a non-functional or non-coding gene that through mutations, it starts to encode for something, whether it be regulatory function or protein or whatever, it does something. So it's a new gene from what would be a junk DNA or garbage DNA, depending on if it has any functionality, I guess. But that's de novo. But it still exists. It's still coming from something else. It's still being built upon something else. To me, I think when he says the word de novo, I think he means it is something that comes out of nowhere.
Right. And can I just add, hybridization is and polyploidy are extremely common in plants. It is estimated that from 30 to 80% of plants are polyploid. Now, the reason for that wide range is simply because we haven't tested the genome of, there's a lot of plants out there. So the estimation is based on, what we've looked at versus what might happen. But most of the things that we eat are actually polyploid. Maize, which we commonly call corn, is a polyploid of teosinte or teosinte. I'm not sure of the exact pronunciation. Never been able to find the exact pronunciation. But teosinte is a wild plant in the same genus, and it has a single row of seeds. Corn, as we know, has a cob. Even the ancient corns, and we do have, through archaeological expeditions, of course, we've, people buried corn with the, with their bodies, and in some cases, in abandoned, buildings and things like that, they found ancient corn. So we have a good idea of what ancient corn looked like. It was a much smaller cob, but it still had the cob with the seeds going all around it, although they weren't necessarily symmetrical like the ones we see now. And so over thousands of years, humans selected what we have now for corn. But originally, it was simply a polyploid of teosinte. In other words, what that means is a whole genome duplication. The entire genome duplicated. Now, what will happen with some creationists, so they go, well, that's no new information. It's just the same stuff. Yeah, but it had a different effect. Corn has a completely different growth pattern from teosinte. And we have the cob, which I would call a cob a new thing, wouldn't you? We have the corn cob with the seeds all around it. I would consider that something new, rather than just a row of seeds, rather like teosinte had.
Yeah, what do they mean by new information? Then?
You're right. That's a good point, Jade. That's something that is a common creationist trope, because you get things like gene duplications or whole genome duplications, and you get these evolutionary novelties, like some kind of new structure or physiological function, and they say, well, that's not new. That's just a moving around of stuff that was already there. Well, of course it is. That's how evolution works.
Well,
that's funny. That's why I think he thinks de novo means just completely new, not based on anything prior.
Well, I think Steve knows my favorite example of genetic mutation that caused something brand new.
The vein or the artery in the heart?
No, that's not it. But that's a good one. That's a good one.
That's one of your favorites.
That's one of my favorites. Okay. Is the navel orange? The
navel and the Valencia orange, yeah.
Right, the navel orange. No, the Valencia is not the navel orange.
Well, the Valencia is the the navel orange is the mutation, the bud mutation, and the Valencia is the second bud mutation.
No, you've got it backwards. The Valencia was probably the parent.
Was it? I thought it was. Okay.
Yeah, no.
I could be wrong on that. I'll take it.
Yeah.
But I thought it was navel than Valencia, but okay. But it's still bud mutation.
It may have been a Valencia. It may have been another sweet orange. But so what happened is we had a bud mutation of a sweet orange. Now, bud mutations are really common. It's how we got a lot of things that are in our grocery store. The Red Delicious apple is an example. Although that Red Delicious apple is actually a bud mutation of something else. It was a bud mutation of something else that was going back to the original Red Delicious apple. The original Red Delicious apple didn't look like the one we have in the store, which looks pretty but doesn't taste like much. So what happens in the growing tip of a plant, of a tree or any other kind of plant, you've got a lot of rapid duplication of cells, right? They're rapidly multiplying. Some people may have remembered at one time in a biology class looking at an onion root, where you could see all the different phases, of the anaphase, the telophase, and all the different splitting. Well, there are actually videos that can show you this happening in real time, and those cells are multiplying like mad. When you have that rapid multiplication, there's an increased chance that something's going to end up in the wrong place, and you get a bud mutation. And like with most mutations, most mutations are neutral. They don't do anything. Every single one of us has probably 140 or more unique mutations to us, and it's generally meaningless. As it so happens, I have 2 that are beneficial, but most mutations are just neutral. So a bud mutation, you get this rapidly growing tip, and you get a bud mutation, and sometimes you get something positive. And so the navel orange came up. Now, there was cool thing about the navel orange to producers was not the navel in the navel orange, but the fact that it was seedless. Selling seedless oranges was a lot easier because the consumer doesn't like seeds. So from the very first navel orange, they were able to take cuttings. And it was actually, the tree wasn't, remember, it's just a branch. One branch of the tree was different. They were able to take cuttings. They were able to propagate that. Since then, there have been other bud mutations, one of which has resulted in the cara navel orange, which is a pink navel orange. That is a bud mutation of a bud mutation. But if you look at the navel orange, it has this structure at the bottom called the navel. That is a completely new structure. That is a structure formed by a single mutation event.
Built upon existing structures.
Exactly, because what will happen if you mention this to creationists, they'll go, that's not a new structure, it's just an undeveloped twin. Really? It looks like a new structure to me.
Then what do they think a new structure means, though? I've never gotten a good answer for that.
That argument to me almost seems like saying if you build a truck out of Lego and then take it apart and build an airplane, you've built the same thing because you used the same bricks.
Right. But if I've actually taken the time to dissect the navels in a navel orange to look at the way the structure is. It's really completely different. Yeah, maybe it is essentially an undeveloped twin, but it's a brand new structure. You can take a regular sweet orange and cut it in half. You can take a navel orange and cut it in half. And the navel orange has a completely new structure. Is it built on, quote unquote, information that was already there? Of course it was, because that's the way evolution works. That's the way reproduction works. But that is a brand new structure due to a single mutational event.
And you're talking about the onion root tip mitosis experiments.
Yeah, mitosis, yeah.
Yeah, what you're referring to, yeah. I mean, I remember, because when I had in biology, we had all the different phases, like you said, the telophase, anaphase, prophase, whatever. I've long since forgotten which one goes after what. And
I have too.
It depends on certain factors, the mitotic spindle and all that stuff. Oh my God, I don't know how people I don't have biologists memorize that stuff. I don't get it.
But if anyone wants to look it up, you can always look at there are videos and pictures of the onion root tip. It's a commonly used one because of the rapid mutation in one slide. Because the mutation, because the reproduction is so fast, you can in one slide get all the different phases, which is really cool. I mean, we did this in biology. Actually, I had a microscope when I was like 7 or 8 years old, and I had slides of that came with it. It was so cool.
Yeah, so it actually, I'm looking at it now. Each cell, you can see a couple dozen cells, and in each cell, you can tell there are different phases of mitosis. Yeah. And
I want to try screen sharing something. Let's see if this works. This is from a video I did, and there's a reason I want to screen share it if I'd have had time, if the damn screen share thing will work. Okay, so I'm going to go to screen share and my entire screen, and let's see if you can see this. Do you see a picture there of a dog and a bat?
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. Now, this is the end of a video I did in which I was explaining to some people why a dog will never be a non-dog and why a dog is its ancestry. For example, a dog is descended from wolves, dogs are wolves, and so on and so forth. And at the very end, I pointed out that should dogs in sometime in the future change, should they get smaller, should they develop wings, they'd still be dogs. We'd call them something different because they'd be very different, but they'd still be dogs. And I used this picture on purpose because which I made the picture in case you're wondering, because if you look how similar that bat is to that dog. So if dogs sometime far in the future ended up very bat-like, they'd still be dogs, but we'd call them something completely different. And
that's only because, in fact, you know what, Jackson, we got you here. Can you kind of talk about clades a little bit and explain the difference between a monophyletic, a paraphyletic, and a polyphyletic? Because I don't think creationists, as you said, know the differences, and they don't seem to understand in a monophyletic clade all ancestry from a common ancestry is in that clade.
Okay, I'm trying to figure out how to stop screen share. It's not working.
I got it.
Can you do it? Okay. Oh, there we go. I got it. Okay.
Exception for a minute, though.
So maybe Jackson, can you? What's that?
Okay, I'll let Jackson go for it. Yeah.
Yeah, let Jackson go for it because he knows cladistics so pretty well. So, can you kind of tell the audience the difference between?
So monophyly is the.
Yep. Go ahead.
I'm sorry. I think my mic is dropping out a little bit because I keep hearing like snippets of things, and I don't think it's everybody else's internet. I think it's my own.
Go ahead.
So if I drop out, okay. So yeah, monophyly is the concept that all these different organisms are related by one common ancestor. You have paraphily, which is when you have like well, I guess paraphily is the more difficult one to explain. Polyphily is when these organisms have different common ancestors. Like one of the classic examples of polyphily is what used to be known as the prosimians. You had the guys like the lemurs, lorises, the and tarsiers all in this one group called prosimians. They were supposed to be basal to all the other primates. Well, it turns out that lorises are actually more closely related to us than they are to lemurs and the and so now they're lorises and lemurs are polyphyletic. They have these different even though ultimately they are monophyletic, even though ultimately everything is monophyletic because we all share.
Do you think it's an easier way to describe it? Maybe is this paraphyletic would be a monophyletic clade that's had some subgroup or subgroups removed?
Do it.
Would it be easier just to say a paraphyletic group is a monophyletic group that has some groups removed from it, one or more groups removed from it?
That would paraphily. Like when I think of paraphily, I think of like warm-bloodedness. Like because paraphily doesn't include all of its descendants.
Right, but that's why it would be monophyletic, removing. Like for example, if you had like the fish group, and you remove tetrapods, that is no longer a monophyletic group. It now becomes a paraphyletic group, right? Because you removed one of the descendants.
Yeah, I mean, we like tetrapods as fish, right? Those like all the tetrapods are
monophyletically fish.
You know, their own little right. Yeah, definitely all fish, but we don't think of us as fish, which would make it a paraphyletic group, right?
Yeah, I think that's an easy way to explain it. Do you remember? Can you explain what a polyphyletic group is for people?
Oh, that's what I was. I went from monophyletic to polyphyletic. I was thinking of polyphyletic.
Yeah, I thought I was wondering because because it's polyphyletic, paraphyletic, and monophyletic. Polyphyletic is just arbitrary things that an attribute that you come up with. I think, right? Like bipedalism would be a group.
Oh, right, because you have like bipedalism in primates, but also in like kangaroos,
right?
You know, and then also birds. Right. And so, yeah, I was thinking of for polyphyletic. I was thinking of the lemurs and lorises example because they used to. It was originally thought they were one group, then they broke into different groups when we got like genomic sequencing and that kind of stuff.
Those are now polyphyletic groups. The lemurs and the
yes, yeah, they're separate little groups because lemur or lorises are more closely related to us now than they are to lemurs, so they're a different group.
Interesting.
Tarsiers are more closely related to us than they are to lemurs. I think I said lorises. Lorises are still in the strepsirrhine group, while tarsiers are haplorhines.
Yeah, but there's that would be but if you combine the tarsiers and the lemurs, that would be a polyphyletic group, though.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Gotcha.
Aren't cladistics fun?
Oh God, no! Cladistics is a nightmare.
I think they're really fun. I enjoy them a whole lot. They're very interesting.
I don't have the skill set to pronounce half the things for these types of names. That would be my limitation. But by the way, Jade, I talked to Sai earlier, and Sai, we're going to try to hopefully do something on chemistry one of these days, and Jade and other people can join us. And would that be?
Oh yeah, viable? that would be great. That would be great. Oh, and you were talking about Lynn Margulis and how she had to fight to get endosymbiotic theory accepted because it was denied for such a long time, and people kind of laughed at her. Well, there's another concept. It was originally considered a theory and then a hypothesis in chemistry, and that's chemiosmosis. And let me give you a link to that.
I swear I thought you were going to go with jumping genes there.
No. This is chemiosmosis. Because for a long time, this is oops, that's the wrong thing. Hang on, that's something else altogether. But chemiosmosis. And one of the things I find interesting is because guess what comes under this heading, and guess who I've been tweaking about this for some time.
Well, chemio isn't that when you have semi-permeable membrane
Yeah, it's ATP synthase comes under this. Yeah.
Because ATP synthase has a hydrogen gradient
Oh
across.
no, Wait. Hang on a minute. This thing.
Chemiosmosis. God damn! See these words.
I know. Chemiosmosis. Yeah.
Chemiosmosis. Yeah. So chemiosmosis would be when you have protons going across a semipermeable membrane, like on the mitochondrial matrix that Ronnie keeps talking about, right?
Exactly. But this was first proposed here. Here's the correct link. Jackson goes, chemiosmosis is my nightmare. But what this is about, because I brought up because honestly, I can't pronounce it unless I'm looking at it. But it was first proposed by Peter Mitchell in 1961. And let me read what it says here. It says, Peter Mitchell proposed the chemiosmotic hypothesis in 1961. The theory suggests that essentially that most adenosine triphosphate synthesis in respiring cells come from the electrochemical gradient across the inner membranes of mitochondria by using the energy of NADH and FADH2 formed from the breaking down of energy-rich molecules such as glucose. And the Wikipedia page has a really nice diagram about this. But this was, when it was first proposed, people were like, no, that's just kind of ridiculous.
I actually did a video on this, but I just call it oxidative phosphorylation.
Right. Well, yeah, but the point I was making, yes, I understand that, but the point I was making is that this is another example of where a scientist brought forth a hypothesis that was just kind of laughed at for a very long time until people started to do more research and went, oh, wait, he's right.
But if anybody cares, I have a video on chemiosmosis, believe it or not.
Right.
And,
he does.
And it was only because Ronnie had actually said, and by the way, Cy, pay attention here, you're going to love this. He claimed that oxygen gets oxidized, especially in the complex 4 of the ETC. And I was trying to explain to him that oxygen is an oxidizer. It receives the electrons and it produces some water. He thinks that the oxygen gets oxidized, and it took me in rational mind 2 or 3 weeks to convince him that you don't oxidize oxygen. I think the only thing that can oxidize oxygen is fluorine. I think it only has a higher oxidative level, but he kept getting that wrong. And so when we corrected him, he finally made a video on it saying, okay, they were right, but they were still wrong.
Yeah. Well, don't forget.
I thought it was hilarious.
Don't forget, this is a guy who thinks water is used in most aqueous solutions.
Yeah.
And 4-digit binary. Let's not forget that one.
Yeah, the DNA code is a 4-digit binary code, just like computer code.
Yeah, I will never understand why you guys put so much effort into that fight.
I think it's hilarious.
Well, it's that, and unfortunately, what happens? People always argue. Why do we continue to argue with these people who are so incredibly wrong? And it's because there are always new people that are coming into the community, and they think that people, like Ronnie, True Empiricism, or Nephilim Free, know what they're talking about because they sound so authoritative. And Ronnie can just spout stuff he's memorized but doesn't understand. I found
that out the hard way.
Yeah, we've shown that. I mean, how many times have I asked him, how does the periodic table work? He's got it memorized, but he doesn't know how it works. So that's why we do this, because somebody has to counter this stuff.
He doesn't know how orbitals work. He doesn't understand the electron valence.
Oh, okay.
Of periodic chart and why it's in columns and things like that.
There are actually a number of different explanations he could give. He could have gone into my mind just went blank. But yeah, basically that's what I was looking. How is it structured? I mean, he could have just simply said, well, there's hydrogen and it's a 1 and it has 1 proton, and then there's helium has 2, and then you go down to the next one, it goes 3, 4, 5, 6. That's the number of protons they have. I mean, he could have done something that.
I don't think he even knows that much. I don't think he knows what an atomic number is.
No, or he could have explained it via electronegativity, because there are a number of different kinds of periodic tables that focus on when you look at them. For example, if you look at a periodic table that's like highlighted according to electronegativity, if you got the electronegativity numbers in there, you will see that electronegativity goes up and across. I mean, there's so many different ways he could have explained the periodic table, just something about the periodic table, but he didn't do anything.
But the problem of all of these things is that, well, I blame the internet. I guess that's because I'm old. But the internet has made it possible for anyone to look up anything and find an article about it that sounds convincing to the uneducated, and then use that. And the example that really bugs me from creationists is this meme of no beneficial mutations, no new information. Okay, when I first heard that, I thought, what? I mean, what do you mean no new information? That's so obviously wrong. I mean, where does that come from? And if you trace it back, as I've done, it doesn't come from any science at all. It comes from, as Huffman was honest enough to say, it comes from the presuppositionalist argument that the world was originally, good, and then after the fall, everything degraded. So their view about even the microevolution that they say they agree about is that the original cat kind had all the genes necessary to form all the other cats, and then by a process of destructive mutations, you got the different species. So this is it all came from one or two sources, and you can actually trace some of those back. There are some folks at the Creation Institute who ICR and AIG at these institutes who are scientists, and they churn out material that then gets published on their websites, and it's kind of the same as political stuff. You get all this fake news that comes from a source for a purpose, and people repeat it and they repeat it, and it grows exponentially because that's the way internet information happens. And you can't really argue with it because it's not, there are no papers. It's not like a scientific argument.
They're blogs. They're just blogs.
They're blogs. Yeah. And, if two papers have different conclusions, and I've been in that position many times, as almost everybody has, two people don't agree, so you do more experiments, a third person does it, it turns out somebody's right, somebody's wrong. That's not what happens here, because there's no basis for these there's no empirical basis for these claims. They come from basically religious presuppositions.
I try to go at that in a different direction, though, with the information argument specifically. I love to ask them what they think information is in this context.
Then it's a whole number rabbit.
Nothing.
Yeah, by the way, but what's funny is Huffman doesn't know creation.com then, because creation.com adamantly admits there's beneficial mutations. They give examples of beneficial mutations, like
so does AIG.
32. No, well, they didn't used to though. AIG, right. I don't think used to. I think they finally had to admit there's some instances of beneficial mutations, because way back when they were adamant there was no such thing as a beneficial mutation. Right. They're all deleterious.
Yeah, they're changing their opinions all the time. They are. That's true.
Well, like you pointed out, lactase persistence. How is that not beneficial when you have a new carbon source?
Right. I'd like to point out that. Like Cy, I'm old. I've been around. I mean, I remember Cy. I turned 68 last week. I remember when we. No, you're ahead of me. Oh, somebody who's older than me around here.
Yes, sir. Yes, ma'am.
I remember back when we had to use punch cards for computers.
I had punch cards. Fortran. I had Fortran punch cards, and I punched tape.
Fortran punch cards.
And I used a slide rule in all my classes.
Yeah.
But what I was going to say is I've been following these people for about 40 years. When I was at UCLA, I found this little book on a sales thingy that was fossils. It's that classic one, fossils. The evidence says no, or whatever.
Right.
And my something. No, not was it, who did that? I don't remember. But anyway,
the book he showed tonight.
No. This is the real old, or Evolution. The fossils say no. It's a classic. So anyway, I thought, oh, well, this is interesting because this was what I was interested in. And I thought, well, if there's a different theory, I'm interested. So I bought the book.
That's Dwayne
Gish, it's Dwayne Gish, yeah. I bought the book. It was a couple bucks. It was just, used book. I bought the book thinking, well, oh, great, there's another alternative. And then I read it and I was just astonished because I didn't know that people really believed in young earth creationism. I'm a Roman Catholic and I went to Catholic school. And I was taught that evolution is the way things work. It's the way, God chose to have things work. No problem. So, here I was in college. I was 19 years old, and I discovered young earth creationism. I was astonished that people really believed that, this that you were to take every single thing in Genesis absolutely literally. I went to Catholic school. I had a Catholic education. We discussed the Bible. We discussed, what it meant and things like that. So that was a shock to me. Since then, I have 2 other editions of that book because he's changed it over time. I remember when they didn't believe in plate tectonics. Plate tectonics was apparently of the devil, but now they believe in a sort of super plate tectonics because apparently, and they also didn't believe in Pangea or anything like that. But now they accept that. They accept that there was just one continent before the flood, and that after the flood, all of the different continents just zipped around the globe to where they're supposed to be with all the appropriate animals. That's their explanation now. Except for the few who may still cling to that Wikipedia article, which talked about how volcanoes might have just sort of blasted certain animals to certain places.
You had mentioned before that you thought that maybe Huffman actually knows more about these topics than he lets on. Do you think there's a cognitive dissonance there? Because, it's hard to imagine somebody to be that educated, to have a medical degree that requires obviously a lot of biological training. You cannot be a doctor and not have biology. But, I can't wrap my head around how somebody could be that erudite and still has so many misconceptions as he does. I think he has complete misconceptions across the board on a multiple of different topics.
Yeah. There are a few, but very few young earth creationist biologists. The ones I've known of are generally physicians, engineers, computer people, and they know a little biology. Remember that the amount of biology that you learn in medical school is very little. He knows a lot. He's a very smart guy, but I wouldn't say that he's biologically sophisticated. But even if you are biologically sophisticated, I'm just looking for it. I can't find it, but there's a quote from Georgia Purdom, who is a very, very bright scientist at, I believe, at AIG. Mm-hmm. She's one of their foremost theorists, very good geneticist. She knows her stuff. I've seen her in debates, and I've seen her I've seen some of the things she's written. But one thing I found that she wrote was fascinating, which was somebody asked her, would you change your views about evolution if, there was some experiment? And she basically said no, because she starts with, and basically Huffman said the same thing. Mm-hmm. She starts with the Bible, with Genesis being correct, and everything has to follow from that. And that is not, I don't think it's theologically correct, and it's certainly not scientifically correct.
I think that excludes somebody from ever being called a scientist. I'm sorry, it just takes them out of science altogether when they make something.
And Jackson just wrote Todd Wood. Yeah, I don't know Kurt Wise, but yes, Todd Wood is exactly in the same position. He has said that evolution makes perfect scientific sense. He has said that, but I don't accept it because it's not biblical.
Yeah, there's a little difference there. Kurt Wise has said that even if all the evidence pointed to an old Earth, he would never accept it. Right. Todd Wood, however, says there's overwhelming evidence for evolution, but he doesn't accept it because he has a presupposition of creationism, which I think both positions are untenable.
Yeah, well, there's nothing you can say at that point.
Yeah.
Well, I don't have a problem with Todd Wood. He's being honest.
He's very honest.
He's being honest.
I try to
be a very honest guy, and if that's the position you want to take, look, I don't have a problem with that. If that's the position you want to take, and you just say we don't know why things look the way they do, perhaps God will explain it to us in time. Perhaps we'll discover the key to all of this sometime in the future. We don't know. I don't have a problem with that. Where I have a problem is where they want to teach. I have a problem with where they want to teach it in schools.
Oh well,
that's where I have the problem.
I'm not saying.
As for,
go ahead.
I was just going to say, as for Georgia Purdom, she is appalling. Because I actually watched it. Yeah, she's completely dishonest. I watched Answers in Genesis. I do it for amusement, but she has just told things that were absolutely untrue.
Yep.
Just comment on things that was completely untrue or spun in such a way that you're dizzy and you lose balance because she is completely dishonest. It's absolutely amazing to me. But she keeps going, well, I'm a geneticist. And then she'll say something that's completely wrong. Like all mutations or most all mutations are deleterious. She will say stuff like that. She knows darn well isn't true.
She quoted Dr. Tompkins' 70% genomic analysis, knowing full well that Tompkins revoked that because of the bug and blast. She knows this. She has to know this. She's a geneticist. She knows that was a bogus freaking thing, and that even Tompkins doesn't stand by it anymore. She still used it on a Answers in Genesis Q&A.
Yeah,
that to me is dishonest.
It is. It's completely. But as I said, Todd Wood, I think he's an honest guy, and he's got this conflict, and he's decided that the conflict is he had, to believe in Christianity the way he believes in it. And as I said, I don't have a problem with people like Todd Wood because he's honest. I have a big problem with people like Georgia Purdom. And as long as people don't want, the Genesis account taught as science, then I don't have any problem with them. Now, if you want to teach, I don't have a problem with religion being taught in school as long as it's being taught in a like a historical context, or the Bible is literature, something like that. I mean, let's face it, Christianity has had a huge influence on the growth of Western civilization. So I would see no problem with having an optional class, not an obligatory class, that taught Christianity and the growth of Western civilization or something like that. That makes perfect sense.
They have classes like that.
Yeah, they do, and again, no problem with that.
Yeah, but I mean, I would take 1,000 Todd Woods over one Georgina Purdom, but even Todd Wood, I think it's still a little bit intellectually dishonest. But at least the fact that he admits there's overwhelming evidence for evolution, obviously he's going to be a higher standard than somebody who just says, "Oh, there's no evidence for evolution," because that's cringeworthy. That to me is right up there with saying there's no such thing as gravity.
Yeah,
I found the quote from Purdom. It's very, very short. It says, "What I believe is not based on the evidence. It's based on the Bible, and using that as my authority to understand and explain the evidence." So, I mean, the fact that she made that statement, I haven't seen that much of her. I've only seen a couple of debates, but the fact that she made that statement, I think after that, there's nothing else you need to say. I mean,
you have no falsification criteria for anything.
That's the end of the discussion. I mean, it's
but
science.
But she's claiming an epistemic certainty there. She's saying that
I know,
presuppose the Bible. I cannot be wrong, and I'm sorry, you cannot have that kind of epistemic certainty on that.
Well, it's worse. It's worse
than that.
You
can be wrong.
It's worse than that because as Jade was saying, it's not just the Bible; it's her interpretation of the Bible.
Right.
And that's I'm sorry to say, but the whole young Earth creationist idea comes from a fairly weird cultish group that somehow spread and took over a big branch of Southern American Christianity, and that's unfortunate. But it's not even mainstream Christianity.
No, and it dates from the middle to the late 19th century, and it comes from Seventh-day Adventism and Ellen G. White and George McCready Price.
That's it.
And the Seventh-day Adventists themselves grew out of the Millerite movement. But but it comes from But if you talk to most these fundamentalist evangelicals, they will deny that it ever had anything to do with Seventh-day Adventism.
Oh yeah.
And they will try to claim that it's historical Christianity, except it isn't historical Christianity. If you've ever bothered to read historical Christianity.
Exactly.
Many of the early church fathers, including St. Augustine, believed that God gave us two great books.
That's right.
The one is the book of the Bible, and the other is the book of nature. And as Augustine has pointed out, they can't conflict because they're both from God.
Right.
And even St. Augustine pointed out, if you see a conflict, you need to take a second look at your interpretation of the Bible. Now, you need to take a second look at nature as well, but you need to take a second look at your interpretation of the Bible.
Right.
And the example he used was the flat earth, because there's a passage in the Bible that talks about God covering the earth with a tent or a skin. And some people thought, well, it has to be flat. And St. Augustine points out, no, because you can take a skin and you can wrap it around like a circle. Every time I think of that, I think of a basketball, you know, because old basketballs, I actually have one. It used to be made of leather, so you could wrap it around, and see. So that's not a proof that the Earth was flat. That using that passage. So yeah, the historic Christianity does not take the Bible in a word for word literal interpretation.
But I like the fact that Sai had noted that even if the Bible was exactly the Word of God, it doesn't matter because Georgina and everybody else has their own interpretation, and that interpretation is open to being flawed.
Yeah, because we're human.
But she doesn't think so. She cannot be wrong in her presupposition that that what she believes that about her interpretation of the Bible is true, because I think she kind of puts them as the same thing. The Bible says this, my belief that the Bible says this are on equal footing.
And I always want to ask people like her, so exactly how many years have you studied Aramaic and Hebrew and Koine Greek?
They probably haven't at all.
Well, you know, Dr. Kenny Rhodes refers to certain Christians as Strong's Christians because they go to Strong's to look up all their words.
Yeah, Strong Concordance.
Yeah, Strong Concordance.
Yeah.
And I love that term, Strong's Christian.
That is
so
pretty
they don't.
Clever.
I mean, these people don't even know what part of speech these words they're looking up are. And we know just from English how much language has changed. Look at a common one with you know these younger creationists that they get all upset about Darwin speaking of races, favored races. Mind you, Darwin spoke of the races of cabbages. But if you bother to look at dictionaries from the time, which I have done, and thank you, Google, for scanning all those books. If you look at dictionaries of the time, you'll see that race meant just a group of things. There's a book I often quote. It's about the Victorian reinvention of race by, I think it's Edward Beasley. And in it, he points out that, in the preface, he points out that if we were to use race today, the way they used it back in Darwin's time, it would be perfectly acceptable to speak of the race of California professors or the race of London taxi cab drivers.
Yeah, it'd just be a category.
And to give just another quick example, a lot of people who've studied English literature are probably familiar with a great comic poem called The Rape of the Lock. Mm-hmm. And this was written by, and my mind just went blank. Anyway, the story was, it's based on a real incident that happened within the Catholic community of England. And at this time, there was a great deal of oppression. So the author was trying to make light of it, to try to get everybody to stop fighting with each other. Basically, what happened was a young man was very enamored of another young woman who had gorgeous hair, and he snuck a lock of her hair. And so this incredible comic poem starts with her at her boudoir with the little fairies helping her arrange her hair and so on and so forth. But rape meant theft.
Yeah. There was a play that ran for a long time in New York City called The Fantastics. I don't know if anyone else has heard of it.
Oh, I can sing it. I can sing the whole thing.
Well, do you remember that there was a number in there which was called something like a rape? And what it really meant was an abduction.
Right.
But the word rape was used over and over again. And at some point during the history of that production, they changed the word rape to abduction, which was very difficult to do because it was a song. So it didn't quite fit. But Yeah, even within my lifetime, which is long but not that long. I remember when gay meant happy. We're all happy and gay, and that's changed also. So yeah, words change very quickly, and they change in all languages. They changed in Hebrew, they changed in Greek, they changed in Aramaic, and of course the translations changed. And I mean, I don't have to tell you, I'm speaking to the choir, so to speak, but the interpretation of Genesis that they come up with is far from literal, because if you actually try to say, well, wait a minute, the book says this, for example, things in Genesis 2 that don't match Genesis 1, they give you an explanation for that, but that explanation is an interpretation.
And it's often very contorted.
Very contorted, right? How was it that that Cain found a wife, and all of these other people, and they have answers for all of these, but the answers are incredibly.
That's what apologetics is, though. But I find it interesting when I ask the younger creationist, if you didn't have the Bible, how would you go about determining the age of the Earth? And there's just no way that they can come up with a young Earth without the Bible. There's just none. There's no way. And they have thrown things out there, and it's just like, nope, that's not evidence for that. Nope, that's not for that. And what's worse is most of them are just negative evidence towards what they consider to be an old Earth, right? And I'm sorry, but negative evidence against an old Earth doesn't get you to 7,000 years.
Right. And I just want to break in, and because Steve put it in the chat here, it was Alexander Pope who wrote The Rape of the Lock. And I don't know why I forgot that. That was just a mental mind fart there for a minute. But yeah, Alexander Pope, just throw that in there.
Somebody in the outside was asking about quantum biology.
Somebody had asked that last night, actually, on when I was on Johnny Drive-By. Quantum biology dealing with Penrose's theory of orchestrated objective reductionism, I think it's called.
Yeah, I think that it has stuff to do with smells and things as well. I think they were asking how it relates to evolution, but I'm not overly
because the orchestrated objective reduction approach that Penrose took was that you have these things called microtubules, and that the quantum fluctuations in the microtubules that causes the emergence of consciousness.
Yeah.
So it's a mind-body thing dealing with the relationship between the actual physicality of the brain into the mind.
Well, and I wanted to add something because Jenny Talwart said in the chat, wait, so raping the land doesn't mean literally non-consensual sexual relations with the ground?
Depends on who you ask, I guess.
Thank you, Jenny. Thank you, Jenny.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of people don't realize that it just meant stealing the land. A lot of people will even just assume that it meant destroying the land. Which
right. No, yeah, you're right. So words change quite a bit. I find that fascinating. I'm not good at languages. I'm good with the English language. It's the only one. I've tried to learn other languages. I'm hopeless. I know some Latin from my upbringing and taking it in school. But I find linguistics really fascinating in the way words change. So you have to be very careful. And again, going back to some of the early church fathers, when they were talking about taking the Bible literally, they weren't talking about the way certain people today take it literally, as in a word by word literal translation. They were talking about the literal message of the Bible.
That's right.
So even that term literally has changed quite a bit. If you read the early church fathers and you read what some people are writing today, literal, as applied to the Bible, has changed its meaning. So, I mean, most of us, Cy and I would probably both say, you know what, Cy, we would probably both say at the same time that we don't take the Bible literally, but we do take the Bible literally. You know what I mean?
Right. Absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah.
I've heard an interesting interpretation, specifically when it comes to linguistics in the Bible, of the idea of resurrection having originally meant sort of a ritual that would have been done while alive, like being reborn into a church or some sort of, almost like a baptism ritual of sorts. That would account for some of the scriptures saying that there was a huge amount of people resurrected or brought to life, and that some interpretations would say that would be them being sort of sworn into the church rather than actually literally rising from the dead. Is that something that
I've heard that too. I've heard it as, because the term death, even in English, the term death has changed its meaning. If you go back to Shakespeare and good old Falstaff, I think at one point he says, "I died 1,000 deaths last night." Well, death was also a euphemism for orgasms.
Yeah.
We know what Falstaff was doing upstairs.
The petite death. Was
right. Yeah. Well, yeah. But when he says, "I died 1,000 deaths," that's what he means. He was upstairs, having orgasm after. But death in a lot in the Bible, like when they talk about the death before, there was no death in the Garden of Eden. Death often refers to this. You're not talking about a physical death. You're talking about a spiritual death. And so to come out of a spiritual death would be
kind of thing.
Right. So to come out of a spiritual death would again be resurrected into a new life, into a new spiritual life in Jesus. So that is a possibility.
So the question is then, why did God make it written in such a way that people can get it so damn wrong? I mean, because young Earth creation is not just wrong; it's potato level wrong. So why did God write it in such a way that he would, knowing that these people would mess it up so bad?
Well, I guess probably because God knew what people were like. Well, we would screw it up. We would screw it up if God carefully wrote a list of things for us to do. You know that.
Oh, I do agree. I'm on board with that. Look at if God exists, no matter how he worded something, man's going to find a way to screw it up. Sure.
Yeah.
Step one: cross the street. Okay, better get out the paintbrush.
What's a street? How do you define street?
Well, as my friend Brian J. once said when we were discussing this, people were saying, "Why didn't God do this? Why didn't he do that?" And Brian, why is Genesis written the way it is? And Brian J. pointed out, said, "Well, was God going to come down and say, okay, I want to explain quantum mechanics to you?"
Exactly. Right.
No, you're dealing with and yeah. So as Hannah pointed out in the live chat, God didn't write the Bible. People wrote it.
Yeah.
Under the inspiration of God, but we people are fallible, and even if you read the Bible, you'll notice that all these people didn't exactly do what God wanted them to do. They frequently went wildly astray.
Yeah, and Shane Zolan, thank you for the super chat. God is the author of confusion, he says. I don't necessarily subscribe to that. I'm just throwing that out there, but I do believe that the people that wrote the Bible, the dozens and dozens and dozens of people that are involved in writing the Bible, there's a lot of confusion because of what they put into the Bible. Because they added a lot of stuff on probably their own personal belief system that had it been written, my view is this, that if the Bible was rewritten from scratch, it would not have the same things in it. If you go back in time, you had different people write the Bible, I don't think it would be that inspired where you'd get the same narrative.
Well, let's put it this way. Let's say that we were allowed to write the Bible now from scratch. Okay, that's kind of what you're saying, right, Steve?
Yeah.
And we would put everything we know about science and about the world, and we get it all right?
Mm-hmm.
How do you think it would look in 5,000 years?
Oh, it would be a mess.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, no,
I don't discount that.
It wouldn't work. It wouldn't work. I mean, because that's the nature of progress. And what's astonishing to me is not how much the Bible got wrong. It's amazing it got anything right, and it got a few things right. So but that's kind of amazing.
But if that's the only way we can know of God, I mean, if the Bible didn't exist, people wouldn't know anything about the Christian God, right? I mean, that's the only way they know about the Christian God is via the Bible, especially the New Testament.
Well, the New Testament, yeah.
Well, I would say not exactly, because
I don't think exactly either.
I have a problem with the whole concept of a Christian God, because there's only one God. So the Muslim God is the same as the Christian God. Now, if you want to talk about different interpretations of God, but could people come to know of God without ever seeing the Bible? Certainly.
They could know a God, maybe, but they wouldn't know the Christian God. How would they know anything about Jesus?
It's the same God.
But how would they know anything about Jesus?
They don't need to.
It's Jesus is God according to Christianity, right?
Yes, but if there's Jesus is one person in the Godhood, but if there's only one God, as I believe, then it doesn't make any difference whether you come to that God. I mean, it does make, but whether you come to that God from Islam or whether you come to that God from some other religion, it's all the same God. There's only one God.
But what would you come to, even if you apply natural theology, as Kenny's saying? look at the most you can come up with is maybe from an argument from aesthetics or something. Here's the universe; it's beautiful. Something created it, but it would be nothing related to what the Christian narrative is with the omni attributes or the very specificity in relating to Jesus. None of that can be known just by natural theology.
Well, I mean, I've also heard a lot of people.
Go ahead.
I've heard a lot of people say that if the resurrection never happened, then they would have to kind of toss out Christianity. But I mean, if there's a decent idea that could just be colloquial language and it wasn't a literal resurrection, but some more symbolic thing, I don't see how you can kind of hold on to the conclusion that it must have been literal, because the language has changed.
But it would change the whole narrative then, obviously.
Yeah,
the whole concept of believing in Christ for the salvation and eternal life, that would all be like to naught if there was no such thing as an actual resurrection. You think?
Well, if there was no actual resurrection, there is no Christianity. I mean,
that's what I would have to say too. So
that's not controversial. I mean, I think everybody.
So I mean, how do most people seem to reconcile this thing then? That there's a decent history of religious cultures predating Christianity and up until Christianity began that would have gone through rituals of sort of a living resurrection, sort of rebirth and order kind of thing. Like, how do we know that this is not just the same as you would have seen previously, taken out of context over?
Well, yeah, I mean, we're running afield here, but from the original discussion. But you
welcome to my channel. It happens.
you can ask, right? You can ask the same. You could phrase the question. How do we know that Jesus ever existed? Which people are asking too. So, either you kind of go along with the Gospels as being true or not, and if they're not, then they're not. So
yeah, no, I mean, that's a good way to look at it. I'm okay with that. I mean, that just seems like common sense to me.
What if they're? I can see there being some truth there that's just been misinterpreted,
Well, the Gospels are pretty clear that the resurrection of Jesus was an actual resurrection from death to life. Maybe your explanation might fit, other cases of people coming back to life, but the Gospels, if you go along with the Gospels, they say very clearly that he died, he was dead, he was buried, he came back to life. So, whether you believe that or not is a matter of faith, but it doesn't seem like a misinterpretation. In other words, it's not that the text was right and we're misinterpreting it. I don't think there's any way to interpret all four Gospels and Paul's writings as a misinterpretation of a true statement. See what I'm saying? So, I mean, it's an interesting idea, but you might as well just go along with Richard Carrier and say Jesus never existed. The whole thing was made up.
Yeah, well, I don't go as far as that.
No, most people don't. But that's the idea that this is simply a misinterpretation of something that was correct but didn't refer to actual physical death. I don't think that applies to the Gospels. I don't see how that could work.
Yeah, I don't either. Although I said we have to be careful when you're looking at the term death because it has so many different meanings.
Oh, in Paul, he writes about there was no death, sin and a death entered the world from sin. And then a few sentences later he says, "I died, and then I came back to life." And that he didn't get resurrected. So clearly he means he died in as you said, in a spiritual sense. So in Paul, I think that's correct. And people, it's not my idea. Obviously, I'm reading it from theologians, which I am not. But I don't think that same case can be made for the Gospels itself.
But when I hear things like for example, and I love Kenny Rhodes. Don't get me wrong, Dr. Rhodes is amazing, great guy. But when he says things like this is where I have to draw the line. He says the resurrection is a matter of history. No, that if it was a matter of history, if the resurrection actually was a matter of record, that's fact, then there wouldn't be any question of people accepting that if God exists or not. We wouldn't have these conversations. The resurrection is a belief that it happened in history, but it's not a historical fact. You can't say that is an immutable part of history, because history itself is fixed. You can't go back and change history.
No, you're wrong. You're wrong. History is not fixed.
History itself, ontologically.
I have to agree with. I see what you're saying, Steve, but I have to agree with Jade. Historical revisionism is very powerful.
That's not what I'm talking about. Ontologically.
He's saying ontologically. Okay.
History is fixed. Now, our revision of it is different. But once an event occurs, that event is always permanently part of history. And so Kenny's suggesting that ontologically, hang on a sec. Kenny's suggesting ontologically that the resurrection happened immutably in space-time, and that I can't accept. If you want to believe that as faith, that's fine, possibly, sure, but to say that it actually was an actual event that is immutable in history, I just can't accept it.
Yeah, I was just trying to make the point that history is actually quite fuzzy.
Well, yeah, that's why I'm differentiating between
Right, I got that, and thank you, Cy, for making that clear. Yeah, ontologically, because, I mean, we all know that most people thought that Troy was a myth until Schliemann, found it. He didn't actually find Troy, but he didn't actually find the Troy, but eventually it was found. But yeah, so lots of things like that. There are lots of things in history that we have discovered were not exactly as originally written. And there are some things we just still haven't discovered. History changes all the time, too.
Oh, yes.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, yeah. I agree with that. Well, I would say that our understanding of history grows.
Right. Well, because, again, we have, just like with biology, there are big blank spots, There are things that we only have a limited understanding of. I'm sure a lot of people here are familiar with Samuel Pepys, which, for those of you who don't know, out there watching, is spelled P-E-P-Y-S, and yeah, it's pronounced Pepys. So Samuel Pepys was a rather annoying individual, if you read him, but he lived through the plague, the Great Plague of London, and he wrote about it. And we have this marvelous historical document because he had this diary that he wrote. We don't have things like that for lots and lots of events. A lot of history is a pastiche put together by pieces here, there, and everywhere. And sometimes even old latrines. There is a whole study of digging into ancient latrines and that were used for centuries and finding out what people threw in the John. And from that, discovering, oh, look, here's a pipe. Here's a piece of crockery.
God, what a shitty job that is.
Well, of course, very funny. Of course, after a couple,
you might like it.
After a couple hundred years, it's not quite so. Everything's composted.
Well,
but yeah, there's. People actually discover quite a bit about history, about certain periods in history by finding out what apparently people have always thrown stuff in the toilet.
Yeah. Some things never change. But anyways, I do got to wrap this up.
Yeah, I was just going to say I've got to go too.
So, Cy, hey, once again, appreciate everything. I like I said, maybe sometime next month or a month after, like I said, I would love to have just a hangout on chemistry. I need to brush up on it. I took stoichiometric chemistry years ago. Don't remember jack squat. So that's why I think that anytime people come on and that can have a presentation on something and explain basic chemistry, I would be thrilled to death, because I like to continually learn stuff, and it's just been so long since I looked at chemistry. Yeah. So
did I give you, Steve? Did I give you the link to the video that I'm going to do on chemistry now
yes.
that I've got?
Yes,
okay, so you got that basic outline. Okay.
Yes, and the pair of charts that you came up with and all that. Yeah.
Yeah, I've got the PowerPoint and it's not completely finished yet. I had to change something because I get all done and somebody goes, "Oh, okay. You left out one part," and I was like, "Oh crap, you're right." And I haven't quite figured out how I'm going to explain that. But
what you're saying, Cy?
I was going to say I love to talk about chemistry, but what I really love is biochemistry. But that's part of chemistry, right?
Yeah, let's do biochemistry.
Dude. I only took inorganic. I didn't take organic chemistry. Everything I learned about organic chemistry has been well after the fact. I got out of school. I had to learn basic organic on my own. But I mean, if you want to talk about organic chemistry specifically, I would be even more thrilled.
That's where all the action is.
Yeah.
It's fascinating. I think organic
Carbon.
chemistry is fascinating, but it's
Fun stuff.
it is the most complicated shit I've ever seen in my life.
Oh no.
It's so complicated.
Can I say, Steve, that there is an advantage today that didn't exist in my day, and
Internet?
that is all the well, not just the internet, but all these computer simulations. It beats the hell out of sitting there playing with a bunch of little, or atomic kits
balls and sticks sticking.
Balls and sticks. Yeah.
Oh, and by the way, Si, sometimes I used to use marshmallows, and then
I remember that. Right.
And
straws.
And
marshmallows.
Straws and marshmallows, and then when I was all done, I'd make s'mores. Yeah.
Get to eat
the little marshmallows worked really good for hydrogen ions.
Okay.
Anyways, by the way, somebody's mentioned Lagrangian physics in the live chat. That'd be David here. David here was actually working on some Lagrangian stuff the other day, so maybe he wants to do a presentation on Lagrangian physics.
That would be cool.
That would be great. Because
I recognized it and I could tell it was Lagrangian physics, but it's been too long for me to even try to do a presentation on that. But anyways, guys, thanks for watching this. Again, this was the Evolution Creationism with Dr. Garte and R.M. Huffman. That was on the NonSequitur channel. Again, just a quick little hangout. I'm going to be on the Godless Iwin channel in about an hour, though. If you guys do not know Godless Iwin, he's really cool. Go check out his channel. And anybody want to promote anything in here real quick? Jackson, you got a channel.
Oh, I do in fact have a channel. I did.
Glad you recalled you did.
I do videos mostly on evolution, but also on creationism.
Yeah, I'd like to point out he has a great channel. Everybody needs to go and subscribe to Jackson Week. Really fantastic channel.
And somebody asked about you. You a great channel. And somebody asked about yours, though, Jade. Do you want to throw yours out there real quick?
It's Meleagris Felis, which I realize most people don't understand. MeleagrisFelis. To explain the name, it basically means turkey cat, roughly. Meleagris is the genus of turkeys. Felis is the genus of cats.
There you go. And we need to get Cy to start making YouTube videos. There you go. But anyways,
I'm too old to start. I have a blog. That's about it.
Well,
by the way, Jade, I was very happy when you mentioned the two books, Theology, because my blog is the Book of Works.
Oh, cool! How cool!
So if you look for the Book of Works, you'll see my blog.
I will look for that. Thank you very much. It's really nice meeting you, Cy.
Yes, same here.
Okay, yeah.
Good night, everybody.